All right, so we are at Greensburg Cemetery in Summit County, Ohio. We are going to be visiting the grave of Jeffrey Dahmer's first victim, Steven Hicks. When teenager Steven Hicks of Coventry Township, Ohio, didn't come home one night in June 1978, his parents figured he had simply stayed out late. But as the days passed with no sign of the young man, his family grew increasingly worried. Steven never came home. Steven Hicks' parents finally learned the truth about their 18-year-old son's disappearance 13 years later, when Jeffrey Dahmer admitted to beating him with a barbell, strangling him, and dismembering his body. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was an American serial killer and sex offender who killed and dismembered 17 males between 1978 and 1991. Many of his later murders involved necrophilia, cannibalism, and the permanent preservation of body parts, which is typically all are part of the human skeleton. Although he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and a psychotic disorder, Jeffrey Dahmer was found to be legally sane at his trial. He was convicted of the 16 homicides he had committed in Wisconsin and Ohio and was sentenced to the 16 terms of life imprisonment on February 17, 1992. According to Dahmer, Steven Hicks was the first of 17 men that he killed, dismembered, and cannibalized. But after killing Hicks in 1978, Dahmer waited nearly a decade before murdering his next victim. Investigators only have Dahmer's word that he didn't kill anyone between 1978 and 1987. But if what is said is true, the long gap fits the established profile for serial killers who often commit their first murder randomly. A serial killer's first murder is often an anomaly, and sometimes commit their first murder by accident or spontaneously on an impulse without much planning or fantasizing about it beforehand. Jeffrey Dahmer was just 18 when he killed Steven Hicks, much younger than the average age of serial killers. Though experts can only speculate today, many say they believe Jeffrey Dahmer was still coming to terms with his sexual fantasies when he killed Steven Hicks. Dahmer was developing his sexuality, and he realized he wasn't like other people. Dahmer was still developing himself. You don't see too many serial killers become serial killers as teenagers. Most of them are still exploring their sexuality and paraphilia, which are sexual desires. And then they start to act out more in their 20s and in their 30s. Jeffrey Dahmer's abnormal sexual desires mostly centered on keeping or possessing a male love object. He wasn't interested in killing itself, but rather he murdered men as a way of ensuring that they would not leave him, then acted out his sexual fantasies on their corpses. Fueled by his desires, Jeffrey Dahmer also turned to other forms of inanimate companionship, mannequins, and corpses that were recently buried in cemeteries. Jeffrey Dahmer was not sadistic. He was engaging in fantasies about being with people who were not alive, who couldn't reject him. Dahmer's extreme lengths to avoid rejection likely started during his childhood. His father worked long hours as a research chemist, and his mother suffered from depression, which likely meant they gave Dahmer very little attention. When his parents divorced in 1978, Dahmer's father, mother, and younger brother all moved out, leaving Dahmer alone in the family's house in Akron, Ohio. The sense of abandonment and rejection was just overwhelming for him. He progressed to the point where he knew when he took men home, they were never going to leave no matter what. The trauma in childhood helps develop fantasies that then fuel the behavior. Jeffrey Dahmer told investigators when he saw Steven Hicks hitchhiking and brought him back to the Dahmer family home. When Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer told investigators he struck Hicks with a barbell, strangled him, and then cut up his body. He later scattered Hicks's bones all around the yard. Steven Hicks was just 18 at the time of the murder. He had recently graduated from Coventry High School. Friends and family members describe Hicks as warm, friendly, and compassionate. Following Hicks's disappearance, his parents did everything in their power to find him, even going as far to hire a private detective and offer a large reward for information leading to their son. They finally got the closure when Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested in Milwaukee in 1991. After Dahmer admitted to killing, investigators found Hicks's teeth and bone fragments on Dahmer's childhood home. He was eventually sentenced to 16 life sentences, 15 in Wisconsin and 1 in Ohio, for the deaths of Hicks and the other victims. At Dahmer's Ohio sentence hearing, Hicks's mother, Martha, told the courtroom that her son had a smile that could keep him out of trouble most of the time, that he had never met a monster like Dahmer before. In 1992, she sued the Dahmer family, seeking $50 million for Dahmer's parents' negligence and failed to prevent their son's killing. In the lawsuit, Steven Hicks' mother and Dahmer's parents should have known that he was a deviant and destined to cause injury and death to others. Jeffrey Dahmer and his family were found guilty in the lawsuit, though it is unclear how much, if any, money the Hicks family received from the Dahmers. On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer met his own fate when he was beaten to death in prison by Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. All right, so we found Steven Hicks's burial here. It looks like he's buried alongside his mother Martha and father Richard. See right here, Steven Hicks from 1959 to 1978, but he was finally laid to rest on October 7th, 1991, when Jeffrey Dahmer admitted to the murder, and they found his body in the Dahmer family home in the yard. His body was cut into fragments and just scattered around the yard. But this is where he's buried.